My father kicked me out when I was 5 months pregnant, then used my grandfather's hotel and our family mansion as collateral for loans he had no way of repaying. 15 years later, he walked into a debt restructuring meeting and asked for mercy from the creditor who now controlled both properties. He didn't know it was me. And the worst part wasn't even the debt. It was the trust document proving he had stolen my daughter's inheritance before she was even born. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 35 now, and until recently, I hadn't said the Whitmore name out loud unless a form required it. The Whitmores were the kind of family people in our town talked about in polite voices. Old brick house on a hill. A private table at charity dinners. A portrait of my grandfather in the lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, like he was some local saint instead of a stubborn man who smoked too much and tipped hotel housekeepers with $100 bills. My grandfather, William Whitmore, built that hotel out of a failing train station property. He loved that place more than he loved most people, but for some reason, he loved me too. When I was little, he'd take me through the service hallways and say, "The front lobby shows you what people want you to see, the back hallways show you how things actually work." I didn't understand how useful that lesson would become. My father, Edward, was his only son. My older brother, Grant, was the golden boy who was supposed to inherit the company, the hotel, the house, the reputation, all of it. My mother, Margaret, had perfected the art of looking sad without interfering. And me? I was supposed to behave. I was 20 when I got pregnant during my sophomore year of college. The father was a guy named Nolan, who liked the idea of being serious until life actually became serious. When I told him, he said he needed time. Then he stopped answering my calls. I waited 3 weeks before telling my family. I kept thinking if I brought a plan, they'd be angry but maybe not cruel. I had already talked to financial aid. I had found a part-time campus job. I knew I would need help, but I wasn't walking in empty-handed. My father listened without moving. He sat at the head of the dining room table with both hands flat beside his plate. The first thing he said was, "Who else knows?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did he hurt you?" Not even, "What are you going to do?" Just, "Who else knows?" I told him Nolan knew and my roommate knew. He closed his eyes like I'd announced a death in the family. Then this can still be contained. I remember touching my stomach because even at 5 months, I was still getting used to the fact that there was a real person in there. A little girl. Mia, though I hadn't told anyone her name yet. "Contained?" I said. Grant leaned back in his chair and gave this little laugh. Not loud, worse than loud, casual, like I had spilled wine on the carpet. My father said, "A daughter of mine does not walk around campus 5 months pregnant and expect to come home like nothing happened." My mother whispered, "Edward." He lifted one finger, and she stopped. That part still gets me. Not because he silenced her. Because she let him. He gave me two options. I could go away until the baby was born and let an adoption attorney handle everything quietly, or I could leave the house and be financially cut off. No tuition, no car insurance, no family trust, nothing tied to the Whitmore name. I said, "I'm not giving away my baby." Grant smiled at the floor. My father stood up. "Then you are choosing not to be a Whitmore." I looked at my mother. "Mom, say something." She put her napkin beside her plate, folded it once, then again. Her hands were shaking. She didn't look at me. Grant got up first. He went upstairs and came back with one of my suitcases. He didn't even pack it well. Clothes hanging out of the zipper. A pair of shoes shoved into the side pocket. He set it by the front door and said, "Don't come crawling back when being a single mom gets expensive." My father opened the door. It was raining. Not storming. Just steady cold rain. The kind that makes everything look gray and mean. He said, "If you choose that baby, you are no longer welcome in this house." So I walked out. I wish I could say I was brave. I wasn't. I cried so hard in my car that I threw up into an empty coffee cup. I slept in a student parking lot that night because I was too embarrassed to call anyone. The next morning, my roommate found me after I missed class and made me come back to our dorm. For the next few years, my life got small and hard. I worked at a diner from 4 to midnight, took classes in the morning, and did bookkeeping for a landscaping company on weekends because numbers made sense when people didn't. Mia was born in July with a full head of dark hair and the angriest little cry I'd ever heard. The first time I held her, I kept waiting to feel ruined because that was what my father said I was. I didn't. I felt tired, terrified, and weirdly steady. I sent my mother one picture, just one. Mia wrapped in a yellow hospital blanket, eyes squeezed shut. My mother texted back 3 hours later. She's beautiful. No call, no visit, no, I'm sorry. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the Whitmore family attorney. It said I had been removed from the Whitmore Family Trust for conduct inconsistent with family standards and damaging to the Whitmore name. I read it sitting on the floor of my apartment while Mia slept in a laundry basket because I couldn't afford a crib yet. The letter didn't mention my daughter by name. It called her the resulting circumstance. I kept that letter. I kept everything after that. Not because I had some grand revenge story forming in my head. Honestly, I was just scared. When you grow up around rich people, you learn paperwork is how they make cruelty look clean. There was no dramatic will reading after my grandfather died 3 years later. I wasn't invited to the funeral service. I found out he was gone because a woman who used to work the front desk at the Whitmore Grand messaged me on Facebook. She wrote, "I'm sorry about Mr. Whitmore. He always asked about you." I stared at that message for a long time. My father had told people I left because I wanted a different lifestyle. Grant told cousins I was angry because the family wouldn't fund my bad decisions. My mother told everyone it was complicated. I kept telling myself I didn't care, that if they wanted to erase me, fine. I had Mia, I had work, I had finals, I had rent due. But every December, the Whitmore Grand hung these huge wreaths in the lobby. When Mia was 4, I walked past with her after a doctor's appointment because the bus stop was across the street. She pressed her hand to the glass and looked at the chandeliers. "Is that a castle?" she asked. I said, "Something like that." Inside, I saw Grant near the lobby bar in a navy suit, laughing with 2 men. For a second he looked right at us. Then he turned away. That should have been enough to kill whatever part of me still wanted them to care. It wasn't. I hate admitting that, but it wasn't. I finished school at 26. It took me 6 years instead of 4. Then I got a job as an analyst for a small firm that bought distressed commercial debt. Basically, when businesses borrowed too much money and banks got tired of chasing them, firms like ours bought the loans at a discount and tried to recover value through restructuring, refinancing, or sometimes foreclosure. It sounds cold. It can be. But I was good at it because I understood people who lied with polished manners. I learned loan covenants, collateral schedules, UCC filings, personal guarantees, trust-owned assets, property records, the boring stuff that decides who actually has power when the speeches are over. By the time I was 35, I was a managing partner at a firm called Halden Ridge Capital. Mia was 15, taller than me, sarcastic in the way only teenage girls can be, and kind in a way that still scared me sometimes. Then the Whitmore file landed on my desk. Not dramatically, not with music playing in the background, just a PDF in an internal deal folder labeled Whitmore Hospitality Group, defaulted senior note. I almost pushed it to another partner. Seriously, I did. There's a part of me that still wanted to be the bigger person, or at least pretend I was above it. But then I opened the collateral summary. Whitmore Grand Hotel, Whitmore House, 3 smaller commercial parcels, personal guarantee signed by Edward L. Whitmore, corporate consent signed by Grant Whitmore, CEO. The loan had been sold by a regional bank after 6 missed covenant reports and 2 missed interest payments. Grant had borrowed against almost everything my grandfather built to renovate the hotel, launch a luxury spa wing, and cover operating losses he had hidden under temporary capital improvements. I disclosed the family connection to our investment committee. I expected them to take me off the deal. Instead, our general counsel asked one question. "Can you evaluate it objectively?" I said, "I can evaluate it better than anyone." And I could. Because the first thing I noticed was an inconsistency. The bank's collateral file said Whitmore House was owned free and clear by Whitmore Holdings. but an old title reference in the appendix mentioned the William Whitmore Descendants Trust. That trust should have been reviewed before the property was pledged. It wasn't, at least not completely. I requested the county filing history, then the trust excerpts, then old board minutes from when the hotel assets were moved between entities after my grandfather died. That was when I found the addendum. It wasn't a secret will like in a movie, it wasn't tucked into a dusty box. It was a notarized trust amendment filed in a boring stack of supporting documents nobody had bothered to read carefully, because rich families assume their own paperwork will obey them. My grandfather had signed it 6 months before he died. The language was dry, but the meaning was not. It said that any beneficial interest previously intended for me would not be forfeited because of pregnancy, marital status, estrangement, or reputational claims made by another family member. If I was prevented from receiving distributions, those interests would be preserved for my legal child or children. Mia. My grandfather had protected Mia before most of my family had even said her name. I read the paragraph 4 times. Then I went into the bathroom at work, locked the stall, and cried without making noise because there were associates outside discussing lunch. The weird part was, I wasn't relieved. Not at first. I was angry in a clean, focused way I had never felt before. They hadn't cut me off because Grandpa rejected me. They cut me off because Grandpa didn't. And then they borrowed against assets that were tied to a trust interest they had never properly disclosed. Our firm bought the note 3 weeks later. The first restructuring meeting was held in a glass conference room on the mezzanine level of the Whitmore Grand. Grant picked the location. I'm sure he thought the hotel would intimidate whoever showed up. Marble floors, brass elevators, my grandfather's portrait watching from the wall like he was still checking the corners for dust. I arrived early and asked the staff not to announce me. Edward came in first, older but still sharp-looking. He had the same silver cufflinks he used to wear to church. Grant followed, talking loudly into his phone. My mother came too, which surprised me. She wore pearls and looked like she hadn't slept. Grant was saying, "Whoever bought the note is just looking for a quick settlement. We push litigation, they'll fold." Then he saw me. His mouth stayed open for half a second too long. My father stopped beside him. My mother put one hand on the back of a chair. Grant said, "What the hell is this?" I sat down at the head of the table because that was where the lender sat. "Good morning," I said. "I'm representing Halden Ridge. We're the current holder of your senior debt." Grant laughed once. "No, absolutely not." Our counsel, Denise, placed the authorization documents on the table. "Ms. Whitmore is the managing partner on this asset." My father looked at me like I had walked into his house wearing muddy shoes. "You bought our debt?" "No," I said. "My firm bought a defaulted commercial note secured by underperforming assets." Grant leaned over the table. "Don't dress it up. You did this because you're bitter." I had imagined that meeting so many times after finding the addendum. In my imagination, I was sharp and calm. In real life, my fingers were cold, and I could hear my pulse in my ears, but I didn't back down. "You borrowed against my grandfather's hotel," I said. "You pledged the house you threw me out of. You missed payments. You hid operating losses. I didn't create that." My father lowered his voice. "Claire, this is family." That almost got me. Not because it was true, because I had wanted to hear those words for 15 years, and he only used them when I held his loan. I said, "No, this is business. You taught me the difference." My mother made a small sound, like she'd been hit. Grant slid a folder across the table. "Here's our proposal. Reduced payoff, extended maturity, no management change. Take it or we'll tie your firm up for years." Denise didn't touch the folder. "You're not in a position to make threats." Grant smirked. "She always liked playing victim. Pregnant girl on the porch, right? Now she gets to act powerful." The room got quiet. My father didn't correct him. My mother stared at her hands. Something in me went still. I opened my bag and took out the copy of the trust addendum. "Since we're talking about the porch," I said, "let's talk about why I was there." My father's face changed before Grant understood. Just a flicker. But I saw it. I slid the document across the table. Denise said, "During due diligence, we found an undisclosed beneficial interest related to the William Whitmore Descendants Trust. We also found representations made to the prior lender stating no such interest existed." Grant grabbed the page. "What is this?" I looked at my father. "You knew Grandpa protected Mia." He didn't answer. Grant snapped, "Dad?" My mother whispered, "Edward." And there it was. Not a confession. Not some perfect dramatic admission. Just three people sitting in silence around a piece of paper they had counted on staying buried. My father finally said, "Your grandfather was confused at the end. He had 2 doctors certify capacity that same month," Denise said. "We have those records too." Grant's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. She wasn't part of the family. She left." I laughed a little, even though nothing was funny. I was 20, 5 months pregnant, and Dad opened the door. Grant pointed at me. "You chose it." "I chose my daughter," I said. "You chose fraud." Denise corrected gently. "Potential misrepresentation. We're not making criminal allegations in this room." Fair enough. Lawyers love careful words, but everyone understood. The meeting ended without a deal. Grant stormed out first. My father stayed behind and said my name in this tired, wounded tone, like I was the one who had disappointed him. "Claire, don't do this to your mother." I looked at her. She was crying silently. For one stupid second, I was 20 again, waiting for her to stand up for me. She said, "We were trying to keep the family together." I nodded. "No, you were trying to keep the family comfortable." The next month was ugly. Grant tried to raise money from private investors. My father tried to get an emergency injunction to stop enforcement. Their attorneys challenged the trust issue, then backed off when Denise sent over the notary records, board minutes, lender certifications, and copies of emails showing Grant had asked their old attorney whether Claire's kid had any enforceable interest. That email subject line was literally, "Claire problem," no joke. The climax happened at the hotel's Centennial Gala, which sounds too neat, but rich families love celebrating themselves, even when the foundation is cracking. Grant had planned it months before the default became public. Investors, local press, board members, donors, everyone was there. The theme was a century of family stewardship. I wish I were exaggerating. By then, Halden Ridge had the right to approve any sale, refinancing, or major management agreement. Grant needed our signature on a forbearance deal before midnight to keep the hotel out of formal enforcement. He assumed I wouldn't embarrass him in front of half the town. He still didn't know me. I didn't interrupt the gala. I didn't make a scene in the ballroom. That would have felt cheap, and honestly, my grandfather would have hated it. Instead, we held the required lender meeting in the private boardroom behind the hotel library, while the string quartet played downstairs. Grant came in furious. Edward looked exhausted. My mother stood near the door like she might run. Grant shoved the forbearance agreement toward me. "Sign it. You get your money, we keep management, everyone stops bleeding." I read the first page even though I already knew what it said. "No," I said. Grant stared at me. "No? The conditions aren't acceptable." Edward rubbed his forehead. "What do you want?" "Correction of the trust records, recognition of Mia's preserved beneficial interest, Grant's resignation as CEO, independent management during restructuring, sale of Whitmore House into a charitable trust at appraised value, credited against the debt, and your written acknowledgement that the prior lender received incomplete information." Grant laughed so hard his voice cracked. "You want me to resign at my own gala?" "I don't care where you resign." My father said, "Claire, please, don't take my father's hotel." That one hit harder than I expected. I said, "You used his hotel to erase his granddaughter. I'm using it to restore her." Grant called me greedy, then cold, then unstable. Then my favorite, money obsessed. I said, "Grant, you pledged a hotel you couldn't run to cover losses you wouldn't admit. Don't lecture me about money." He looked at my mother. "Say something." She flinched. For once, she did. "Grant," she said quietly, Sign it. He turned on her. Are you serious? She looked at me, then at him. I should have said something 15 years ago. I'm saying it now. It didn't fix anything, but I won't pretend it meant nothing. Grant signed after Denise told him the alternative was immediate enforcement, notice to all secured parties, and a much more public explanation to investors. My father signed after him. His hand shook so badly he had to start over on one page. By the next morning, Grant had resigned for personal reasons. The board appointed an outside turnaround firm. Edward stepped down as chairman within 2 weeks. The trust records were corrected after more attorney letters, more delays, and one very tense mediation. Mia didn't become some teenage hotel heiress overnight. That's not how trusts work, and honestly, I wouldn't have wanted that. But her interest was acknowledged, valued, and protected. Money that should have been preserved for her was restored through the restructuring settlement. Whitmore House was transferred into a nonprofit we created with the proceeds credited properly through the deal. It took 9 months, 3 appraisals, 2 tax attorneys, and more paperwork than any revenge stories ever mention. We called it the Mia Whitmore House. It provides emergency housing grants and scholarships for young mothers trying to stay in school. The first time Mia saw the sign, she didn't cry. She just stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, looking unimpressed in the way teenagers do when they're trying not to feel too much. So, she said, Grandpa kicked you out of here? My father, I said. Right, sorry, your dad. Then she looked at the house again. Do we have to forgive them because of this? I thought about giving her the mature answer, something soft and balanced. Instead, I told her the truth. No, we don't have to forgive people to stop letting them own us. My mother has tried to repair things, slowly, awkwardly. She sends Mia birthday cards now. Mia reads them, says, huh, and puts them in a drawer. My father has not apologized in any real way. He sent one email saying mistakes were made during an emotional time. I didn't answer. Grant still tells people I destroyed the family over an inheritance dispute. I've heard he calls it a stolen inheritance story, like he's the one who was robbed. That used to make me furious. Now it just sounds pathetic. Because here's the thing about toxic family drama. They'll call you greedy when you ask for what was yours. They'll call you cruel when consequences finally reach them. They'll call it a revenge story because they don't want to call it accountability. I don't feel like I won everything. Winning didn't give me a mother who protected me when I was scared. It didn't give me a grandparents who loved her from the beginning. It didn't give me back the nights I studied with one hand on a calculator and the other rocking a baby seat with my foot. But it gave me proof. Proof that my grandfather didn't see my daughter as a stain. Proof that I wasn't crazy for thinking something had been taken from us. Proof that silence can protect a lie for a while. But paperwork has a funny way of waiting. Some people call that karma. I call it the bill finally coming due. So what would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have signed the forbearance and kept the family business intact? Or would you have forced them to correct every record and face the consequences? And do you think I owe my mother forgiveness because she finally spoke up? Or was 15 years of silence too much? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy inheritance stories, revenge stories, and real-feeling family betrayal stories where the truth comes out through documents instead of violence, please like and subscribe for more.